Day 1.
You know they did this experiment in Russia once already?
Dr. Cynthia Croft showed a smile as she nodded, then shook her head in response. Yeah, they did something similar, let's say. But we are going in a completely different direction. Those Russians had nothing more than microphones and small windows to look into the chamber where their subjects were. We are better prepared now, we know more, and we most definitely have a goal for this experiment. She could see the tension in her colleague's face, but he nodded in the end. Cynthia turned on the screen for the desktop PC that was connected to all the cameras and instruments. The picture flickered for a moment, then got sharp and clear. She could see a room made of metal with bookshelves and a TV on the wall. A toilet, a fridge stocked with enough food to last those people for at least a month, and 5 comfortable chairs, but no beds. There was a drain in the center of the room and an almost open shower in the corner, as well as 2 faucets on the wall. All in all, it looked eerily similar to the experiment those Russians had tried decades ago, but there were also marked differences. For starters, their test subjects were volunteers, not political prisoners. They had come from all walks of life and would be paid at the end of the experiment. Secondly, the gas they were going to use was a more refined version of the Russians' compound and should, at least in theory, not lead to such psychotic breaks. Thirdly, they would be able to monitor their subjects' heart rates, blood pressures, and pulses 24/7 without the need to drag them out of the chamber. And finally, they had learned from their predecessors' mistakes and had fitted the test subjects with devices that could immobilize them without putting them to sleep. This time, they were prepared. Cynthia heard her colleague's phone going off, then watched him out of the corner of her eye as he took the call. His face was still tense, as was his whole body language. He wasn't a true believer like her. She liked to tell people behind his back. No, this man had only come along for the glory, not for what she knew would be a true breakthrough. If it weren't for her, he would have probably stayed in his own small lab close to the Red Sea, happy to do tiny, useless experiments to pass the time and get the grants. But his appearance had still proven fruitful for her endeavor. This man was eerily well connected for someone not even working in this part of the world. One phone call, and most of the bureaucratic walls that had stood in her way had crumbled. A second one, and her funding had increased by 10%. Cynthia had no idea how he had done this, but she had stopped complaining about having to work with him that exact instant. As long as he stayed out of her way and didn't try to stop the experiment halfway through, she'd gladly share the fame that would be coming soon. The man next to her ended the phone call, then gave her a solemn look.
They are ready,
he said, curtly, and Cynthia nodded. She could feel her own blood pressure rising as she turned on the microphones in the chamber, then heard the sound of a massive, blast-resistant door opening through the speakers of the PC. This was it. The beginning of their journey and of her masterpiece. 5 figures appeared on the camera, walking in a straight line into the middle of the room, before the sound of the door closing again came through to her. Cynthia couldn't help but smile at the sight. She had spent weeks working with psychologists on their profiles. They had been chosen for their resilience to stress, their nonviolent natures, and their ability to endure pain. Back then, the Russians had made many mistakes she wanted to avoid, and the most glaring one in her eyes had been their choice of test subjects. Just picking 5 random enemies of the state and putting them into such a situation was bound to fail. In all likelihood, she wouldn't be able to reproduce their failure of an experiment even if she tried. A comforting shiver ran down her spine. Oh, how she had missed this kind of excitement. This must have been what great explorers had felt when they had caught sight of land for the first time after long sea voyages. The 5 people in the chamber were standing around, looking at the almost Spartan furnishings, waiting for her to tell them what to do next. Cynthia put her thumb on a button on the keyboard and watched a small symbol for the speakers inside the room turn from grey to green. "Good morning," she greeted, and watched them all turn around to find the source of her voice. They had gone to great lengths to make sure the speakers in there wouldn't be easily located. "I hope you had a good night's rest and feel well. The experiment will start in a minute, but first I need to go over some ground rules with you guys. As you all know and have signed off on, you will be monitored around the clock. There is enough food for you guys, so you don't have to ration it, but we will not be able to open the door again until the full month has passed. And just as a reminder, please refrain from any contact with each other. No one is going to get kicked out of here for simple touching, but if you start to get violent, we will have to intervene." She watched as 5 people simultaneously put their hands on the shiny collars they were now wearing. It was a rather crude method, but Cynthia had still picked it over the other ideas they'd had. They could immobilize any of them, or all of them, for up to 8 hours, which would easily be enough time for any psychotic break to end. There was no danger of them falling asleep because of it. Furthermore, please refrain from calling each other anything but the number on your outfits. We know it might seem strange, but you'll grow accustomed to it quickly, and it will make the notes far easier. Lastly, you will soon hear a soft whooshing sound coming from the walls. Please don't be alarmed, as the gas we'll be pumping into your room is non-toxic, non-addictive, and not even flammable. The smell might be a bit much at first, but I'm sure you won't notice it anymore in an hour's time. Cynthia watched the live camera feed and could see their smiles faltering a bit. In all likelihood, the 5 of them only now realized that this would be their new reality for the next 30 days. They wouldn't be able to leave, would be recorded around the clock, and would have to share this space with the other 4 without a chance to catch some alone time. Well, they would grow accustomed to that too. Cynthia's eyes fixated on the tallest person in there, a man of African descent with a big 1 on his outfit. He had been smiling the brightest during their interviews, and Cynthia had immediately felt herself drawn to him. With his easygoing personality and witty charm, he was probably a born leader, but right now he looked almost frightened. The others around him weren't much better. Each and every one stayed frozen in their place, looking at their surroundings with those tense expressions. They hadn't talked to each other beforehand, hadn't even seen or known who they would be in there with. And now it all suddenly seemed to feel real to them. Cynthia let go of the button and watched the small icon turn back from green to grey. They wouldn't be able to hear her anymore, but she could still listen to everything inside the room. A hiss registered on the microphone as the gas got pumped in, and Cynthia felt her fingers tapping the desk nervously. There were hundreds of ways this experiment could go wrong, she knew. A sudden allergic reaction by one of the test subjects, some kind of mechanical failure, or something as stupid as an energy outage their emergency generators couldn't catch. Cynthia hit a few keys on the keyboard, and the screen changed. Now the camera feed was only a quarter in size, and the rest was filled with columns of numbers. She looked at a specific one, the one above the noise level in the room, and held her breath. 1.6%, 1.8%, 2.1%. It was the amount of gas in the room. They had tested it out again and again, but Cynthia had never before felt this tense while waiting for a number to go up. For the best effect, they would have to get it to 15%, and after that, it would stay at that level for the next 30 days. 4%. Cynthia looked over at Dr. Malik standing next to her chair. His face was tense as well, and he reached out and pointed at a small part still showing in the video. Numbers 1 and 4 were walking side by side through the room. They had finally started moving, at least. 8%. Her fingers were still tapping the desk, and Dr. Malik was shooting her a glance. One of the subjects, number 3, was sitting in one of the chairs, staring up at the wall, while 2 and 5 were talking to each other off to the side. The sound of the gas streaming into the room was still registering at 32 decibels. Everything was fine, Cynthia told herself. 12%. 14%. 15%. Finally, she watched the number reach the perfect range, then stop, and Cynthia let out her breath as if she were exhausted. Everything was going according to plan, and now they only needed to wait. She pressed a key and switched the screen back to the video feed. Slowly but surely, they were starting to investigate their surroundings. Well, almost all of them. Number 3 was sitting in their chair, still staring up at the ceiling. Cynthia took a quick glance at his vitals, then shook her head softly. They were normal. He wasn't having any physical symptoms, at least. Maybe that was just his way of coping with the stress. She couldn't really blame him, Cynthia thought, then felt a tap on her shoulder. Dr. Malik gave her a nod, turned around and left the room through the door behind her. Yeah, not only the test subjects, but they too would be shackled to this place for the next month. She and her colleague would take turns watching the screen and keeping protocol. And now her first shift had begun. Cynthia couldn't help but smile as she relaxed a bit in the comfy chair, with her hands behind her head, and watched the experiment finally unfold. Day 4. Dr. Cynthia Croft was sitting in front of the screen again, only sparing odd glances at the video feed while she was looking over the notes left by her colleague. None of the test subjects had fallen asleep yet, just as predicted, and their behavior was still mostly normal. She could see small spikes whenever one of them said something, while they stood in a circle in the middle of the room. This conversation had turned a bit morbid, but it was still on an acceptable level. Deaths around them. Grandparents, even the sibling of number 4, the Caucasian woman, were being discussed. Cynthia minimized her colleague's protocol, then pulled up the data they had from the Russian experiment. After day 4, it had all changed. The subjects there had started showing strange behaviors, and their conversations had suddenly pretty much cut off. She didn't want a repeat of that here, but she couldn't very well start telling them that. It would spoil any findings if she intervened. She closed that tab again and concentrated on the people in the room. The gas levels were still in the expected range. They hadn't slept, but had also asked for the TV to be turned off now. Something was changing. She could feel it and see it in the way they looked at each other. There was a coldness in their eyes. Cynthia would have to keep a close eye on their interactions. The button for the shock collars was always at hand, she reminded herself. Day 6. Cynthia breathed deeply in and out. She wasn't sitting on the chair anymore, but standing in front of the desk, glaring holes into the computer screen. This was the worst-case scenario, she thought, as her finger hovered over the button to activate her microphone. It was number 5, the man with the Southeast Asian heritage, who was standing in the middle of the room, completely alone, while the other 4 were huddled in one corner. He was staring up at the one camera they hadn't hidden, and his vitals were elevated. Blood pressure 150 systolic to 110 diastolic. Heart rate 95. Slight fever. Cynthia cursed in her mind. They had talked about what to do in cases like this, but now she wasn't sure if any of their prepared responses would work. The man staring into the camera had asked to be let out. Cynthia's fist hit the desk and made the screen wobble. The ethical thing to do was to let them out, but the moment she opened the door, the whole experiment would be over, for all of them. The room would be contaminated and no one would believe any of their findings. There was, of course, a clause in the contract the subjects had signed, one telling them that the experiment wouldn't be stopped under any circumstances. But Cynthia knew that that would never hold up in court. Should she talk to the man? Tell him to calm down? What if his vitals got even worse? Her eyes wandered to the button for the electric collar the man was wearing. She couldn't torture him into compliance. Shaking her head, she groaned. Her prepared response was to inform him that he had signed the contract and would be losing all his money. But this look in his eyes already told her that he didn't care about that anymore. No, this wouldn't do. They had to stop the experiment, right? Dr. Malik would probably freak out if she didn't let them out this instant. Cynthia bit her lip and then pressed the key for the microphone. She could feel her own heart rate spiking as the icon turned green. May I remind you that you signed a contract stating that you would be part of this experiment until its end? All the subjects looked at the camera as her voice echoed through the room, and the man standing in the middle shook his head, his eyes now glaring at her with full-blown rage. He couldn't be talked out of it, part of her wound. The button for the shock collar seemed to call her name, but Cynthia resisted. But what else could she do? Telling him that he had already managed for 6 days wouldn't solve this situation either. She needed something to put pressure on the guy. A sudden thought hit her, and she opened her mouth, then let out a deep sigh. If you demand to be let out, we will accommodate your wish. But I have to warn you that with this, the whole experiment will be over. That means that neither you nor anyone else here will get any kind of compensation. The gazes of the 4 others immediately shot over to the man who, for the first time, stopped staring at the camera as his eyes wavered. Cynthia couldn't help but smile. And furthermore, not only will you not be compensated for effectively sabotaging this experiment, but we will come after you for costs incurred. That means you will be paying us back for everything here, which is a substantial amount. She knew that was complete and utter bullshit. No judge would award them damages for such a wildly unethical situation. But she hoped the subjects wouldn't realize that. The man's eyes not only wavered, but his whole body language changed as the others in the room suddenly came toward him. Cynthia let go of the key and watched as the symbol turned grey again. She could hear the whispers flowing in the room and looked on as number 1 grabbed number 5 by the shoulder. This was against the rules, she knew, but the only button for the shock collars her finger was hovering over was the victim's. As long as the others didn't go too far, she wouldn't butt in. Cynthia leaned back and witnessed the whole altercation. From the first shove to a punch thrown by number 3 at number 5's chin. It was over in a matter of minutes, and the man was now lying on the floor, no longer staring at the camera. She would need to talk to Dr. Malik about this, she knew. But at least for now, no one was demanding to be let out anymore. Day 7. Cynthia still couldn't believe her ears. Dr. Malik was gone already, and the discussion had been brief. She had thought he would be incensed by her actions, but surprisingly, she had seen him smile as she had answered his questions, even if it was just for a moment. Apparently, she wasn't the only believer in this place anymore, she thought. But now she had another problem. The behavior of the subjects was changing. They were still standing around, well, almost all of them, but they weren't talking anymore. Cynthia could see their eyes shifting from one fellow subject to the next, only lingering on them for a couple of seconds each time. They all did this. Well, except number 5. He was now sitting in the corner, his head bowed. Cynthia knew he wasn't sleeping, even if his position seemed strange. His vitals were just a bit higher than normal. His breathing was regular, and the bruises on his neck and chin seemed a bit darker than yesterday. She stared at the screen for a few more seconds. During the Russians' experiment, the people had fallen almost silent around this time as well. Besides the whisperings into the microphones back then, where they tried to denounce their fellow test subjects. That wasn't a problem she was experiencing right now, at least. But they did seem to be a bit standoffish with each other. Was that a consequence of yesterday's fight? It was hard to tell. What she could say, and that with certainty, was that the vitals of the other 4 were slowing down a bit. They had resting heart rates in the low 60s, and the blood pressure was also on the lower end of the healthy spectrum. She made notes of the readings, then continued watching the subjects through the camera. No one had taken anything out of the fridge since her shift had started. They weren't watching TV or reading books. All of them were just standing there, keeping an eye on each other. Maybe they wanted to make sure no one else would demand to get out. Was this paranoia? It was hard to tell, and without an extensive interview, there would be no conclusion. At least for now, all she could do was watch and wait. Day 9. Cynthia was staring at the readout of the screen in disbelief. 2 of the subjects had finally moved, as if on command, and had walked into the middle of the room. Numbers 1 and 4, the black man and Caucasian woman. She could see their wide, bloodshot eyes staring at the camera. Their vitals were high, insanely so, and while the other 2 watched silently, and number 5 was still sitting in the corner, Cynthia steeled herself for what was to come. They would demand to be let out, right? A hand touched her shoulder. Dr. Malik was standing next to her as if to supervise her actions. At the start of the experiment, she would have felt annoyed, but right now, Cynthia was almost thankful for it. Like this, if anything happened, the blame couldn't be pinned on her alone. The 2 people were still staring at the camera, but their mouths remained closed. What was going on in there? She could see their heart rates at 170, still rising slowly, blood pressure through the roof. Did they have a medical emergency? That was debatable, but Dr. Malik at her side hadn't said anything either. Did he want her to wait? Cynthia reached out and hovered her finger over the microphone button, but her colleague's hand gripped her wrist the next moment. As she looked up, she could see him simply shaking his head. A cold chill ran down her spine. What was going on here? She wanted to at least ask the subjects what they were doing. The 2 pairs of eyes were still staring at the camera, unblinking. Cynthia felt strange. It somehow gave her the impression that they could and did see her through the lens. Number 5, the man they had ganged up on, suddenly rose to his feet behind them. Cynthia's eyes shot to the readings inside the room. Something was softly spiking the normal noise the microphones were picking up. There was a whisper in the air. She looked more closely at the video feed. Number 5's lips were moving incessantly. He was mumbling something, and by the looks of it, he was repeating himself over and over again. She couldn't pick out the words while he slowly advanced on the 2 people in the middle of the room. Was it some kind of curse he was muttering? Did he blame those 2? Cynthia looked over at the buttons for the shock collars. If he started attacking them, she would need to take him down like that, right? Would Dr. Malik try to stop her? She felt sick. This definitely wasn't normal behavior anymore. But what really bothered her was that she had no idea what exactly those people in there were going through. How could she build a coherent narrative out of these random bursts of madness? Number 5 arrived at the backs of the 2 standing people, and Cynthia reached out to keep her hand close to the shock buttons. He was still mumbling those damned words she couldn't make out. She felt her hand trembling, then heard her colleague clearing his throat, and when she looked at him, she could see that he was also shaking his head. He didn't want her to interfere. Cynthia wasn't sure if she should ignore him, as suddenly her eyes were drawn to the screen again. Now 3 pairs of eyes were staring out at her from the video feed. Only number 5 was smiling, then stopped mumbling, and put his hands on the other 2 shoulders.
No one comes in here,
he announced suddenly, and Cynthia heard a shrill warning siren. The vitals of number 1 and 4 were going haywire. Pulse at almost 200 beats per minute, and blood pressure of 200 over 140. This was a full-blown medical emergency. She wanted to press the button to activate the microphone, but Dr. Malik's hand stopped her. Cynthia watched the eyes of the 2 standing in front of number 5 bulging out. Then 2 screams erupted as their own hands shot up to their throats. They were still looking at her, staring at her. She watched helplessly as the man and woman suddenly tore out their own throats with a sickening crunch and collapsed to the floor. The silence after their screams now feeling as loud as their last cries themselves. Number 5 was standing there alone now, completely fine after watching his 2 fellows dying, smiling softly as he looked at the camera. Blood was gushing out of the 2 shaking bodies on the floor, splashing onto his uniform, but he either didn't realize or didn't care. "We have to stop this," Cynthia mumbled, but the hand of her colleague went from her wrist up to her shoulder. Dr. Malik was shaking his head.
It can't be stopped now. Read the reports,
he whispered, then turned around and walked off. Cynthia's whole body was shaking. This had gone too far, right? Then why was everyone behaving as if it had been inevitable? She put her face into her hands in utter shock, but even then she could feel it. 2 pairs of eyes were staring at her, one coming from the screen, and the other from behind where Dr. Malik was resting. Day 11. She still felt sick looking at the screen. The 2 bodies were lying there in the middle of the room, and the 3 remaining people didn't seem bothered by it in the least. Cynthia had trouble sleeping, well, even resting. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see them. Numbers 1 and 4 tearing out their throats and falling silent. Her own hair was a mess now. She had developed a nervous tic, but there was nothing she could do anymore. Even if she called the authorities now, she'd be complicit for not stopping it sooner. Instead, she had gone through the old protocols, the ones of the first experiment. It had unfolded similarly, but at this point, the Soviets had already cleared the room and taken the subjects out of the gas. Should she turn it off as well? If she did so at the start of her shift, Dr. Malik might only realize what had happened when it was already too late. No. He kept checking in on her regularly now, claiming it was to help her, but she knew he only wanted to make sure the experiment wouldn't be messed with. How had he kept this side of him from her for this long? The guy was a maniac. She felt this crushing pressure on her, but found no way to escape. What was the plan here? They couldn't very well publish a paper with people dying while they simply sat back. Cynthia wanted to bury her face in her hands again, but sudden movement on the screen made her freeze. The 3 remaining test subjects were turning toward the center of the room and then started walking completely in sync as if they had practiced it beforehand. From the length and timing of their steps to the way they breathed and moved their shoulders, it was all absolutely the same. Cynthia couldn't help but stare, then suddenly glanced at their vitals. They were the same as well, from the pulse to the blood pressure to even the oxygen levels. They hadn't eaten anything or drunk a sip of water in days. How could they be moving about at all? The three of them reached the center of the room where the bodies were still lying, and then looked up at the camera. Cynthia felt her whole body trembling. "What are they doing?" She asked no one in particular, then jerked around as her colleague answered, standing right behind her.
"Choosing."
She felt a chill from the coldness of his voice. The man knew something she didn't. Numbers 2 and 3 suddenly took a step back, leaving number 5 in front, staring at the camera. It reminded her of his plea, but this time the eyes staring at the lens were filled with utter madness. She could see his vitals suddenly rising as a smile formed on his lips. 4 hands grabbed him from behind, by his shoulders and head. His pulse was already at 100 beats, then 120. Cynthia could see fingers digging into the flesh of his cheeks, blood trickling out. Her own hand shot forward and hit the buttons of the shock collar for numbers 2 and 3. A scream erupted from the room, loud and drawn out, as all 3 people cried out in pain. Cynthia could see muscles bulging in all the necks. What was going on there? She had only shocked 2 of them. A hand grabbed her roughly by the wrist and wrenched her fingers off the buttons.
"Do not interfere,"
Dr. Malik's voice thundered beside her. Cynthia tried to struggle against him, but the man pulled her arm back. The scream coming from the speaker stopped, and she had to watch helplessly as the 2 test subjects tore at number 5, whose vitals were now spiking. The medical emergency alarm went off again as the heart rate exceeded normal limits. Cynthia wanted to shout, but her throat was closed up. 2 hands could be seen on the screen, grabbing the man's head and neck. There was something new in number 5's eyes. Fear. With a sickening crunch, his neck broke, and the man fell to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. His vitals flatlined on screen, and finally Dr. Malik let go of her wrist, hissing an angry curse at her as he took a step back. She couldn't do anything but stare and tremble. What was going on here? Her eyes were fixated on the screen. The 2 remaining people walked off to the side, their own heart rates not even touching 60 beats per minute. They were as calm as could be, like nothing had happened at all. Day 14. Cynthia felt sick to her stomach watching the screen. The 2 remaining subjects were kneeling on the floor, staring at each other. And they had done so for the past 2 days. Not a single moment of sleep now for 2 weeks, no food or water for 7 days. And yet their vitals were still there, even if they were slowing to an incredible degree. 20 beats per minute for number 3, the man from South America. 22 for number 2, the woman of Asian descent. This unblinking staring contest had gone on for 48 hours, and there was no end in sight. Dr. Malik had threatened her after the last death. He had told her that he would kill her if she ever interfered again. And Cynthia knew he meant it. She had stopped taking notes. It seemed pointless. What they were doing here was not scientific at all. They had watched 3 people die, one of them murdered. But the experiment was still continuing, as if nothing had happened.
"You know,"
a voice suddenly piped up right next to her ear, and Cynthia almost screamed.
"when they did this experiment the last time, my father was actually involved. You could say it is a family business for me."
She looked at the man standing there, staring past her and at the screen. There was a genuine smile on his face, and it made her sick.
My father had his own hypothesis of what had happened back then. It was not meant to end like that, with everyone dying, but people interfered. I don't think that's true. It was always meant to end with death. That last subject, his last words, I don't think they were correct. At least, not entirely.
Cynthia hadn't heard him speak this much in all the time they had been together. He was beaming as he finally felt free enough to get something off his chest. She didn't like it, but couldn't bring herself to stop him.
I do not know if it was the translation or if the subject was delirious. You see, sleep is our hiding spot. Our way of escaping something that comes closer and closer to us with every waking moment. It has been in our collective subconscious since our ancestors first crawled out of the ocean. It is madness and terror, something that has been hunting for eons, trying to grab hold of someone to finally take form. Some people experience its grasp quicker than others. Those we call mad, but no one has ever faced it completely.
Cynthia shivered as she felt a hand on her shoulder. She forced herself to stop looking at him and instead stared straight at the screen.
Watch closely and witness the appearance of something thought impossible. A true apex being that has been searching for a way to get birthed for millions of years.
Cynthia felt a shiver running through the hand on her shoulder. This man was completely mad. The speaker beeped suddenly, and her eyes shot to the tab with the vitals. Number 3. The man's pulse had dropped to below 20 beats per minute. She could see it in the video feed. He was wobbling while his pale and emaciated body started to shake.
It has chosen.
The voice close to her ear whispered as the man on screen suddenly fell forward and hit the floor. Cynthia felt the vibration through her chair. This was impossible, she thought. The video feed began flickering as the woman on screen jumped up and started screaming as if finally freed from her trance. Cynthia tried to say something, but her voice caught in her throat. The man standing next to her chuckled as his fingers dug into her shoulder. As the whole screen flickered once more, the sound cut off for a moment. Cynthia felt the electricity surging in the air. She watched the screen come alive again. Subject number 3's body was gone from the floor, and instead she could see him standing behind subject number 2, his hand lifting her off the ground by the neck.
It has risen! Rejoice! We have done it!
The glee in her colleague's voice almost made her retch. Eyes stared out at her from the video feed. The woman was begging him with her gaze to stop it, but far worse, the man, subject 3, who was looking not at the lens, but straight through it, at her. She heard the neck breaking from the speakers, but felt it in the floor. Subject number 2 fell from its grasp lifelessly, its vitals flatlining. Cynthia looked at it more closely. None of the test subjects had a pulse, yet number 3 was still moving. Something was wrong. She heard the sound of the heavy door to the room opening without her input, and felt her colleague's hand disappear from her shoulder. The screen flickered again, and the being that once was subject number 3 started walking toward the open entrance. Cynthia looked over and could see the man who had stood next to her on the floor now, prostrating himself. A cold chill blew through the sticky, damp air. It was coming toward this room. She could feel it. Cynthia didn't hear any footsteps, but she knew it was there. The door behind her opened, but her body was frozen. She was staring at the now empty room on the screen of the computer as the temperature around her started dropping. Cynthia couldn't move a muscle, couldn't even scream. The screen flickered, then turned off as an ice-cold hand touched her shoulder. In the dark reflection of the monitor, Cynthia saw herself, sitting there, and standing behind her, the being they had brought into this world. Finally, she screamed as the thing grinned from ear to ear, then snapped her neck without a flicker of mercy in its cold, dead eyes.